Hey guys, welcome to The Deep. Each week, Jill and I are going to roll out a different gem from the Disney Plus vault and go deep to talk about the history and the trivia and give our overall impressions of why you should watch it or not. It could be a Disney classic, maybe an old favorite cartoon, something recent that you might have missed, or something you've never even heard of. This week, it's the Disney classic Bedknobs and Broomsticks. This movie musical combined animation and live action in the spirit of movies like Mary Poppins, So Dear to My Heart, Pete's Dragon, and Song of the South. During the Battle of Britain, Miss Eglantine Price, played by Angela Lansbury, a cunning witch in training, decides to use her supernatural powers to defeat the Nazi menace. Pretty Disney so far, right? She sets out to accomplish this task with the aid of three inventive children who have been evacuated from the London Blitz. Joined by Emelius Brown, played by David Tomlinson from Mary Poppins, the crew uses an enchanted bed to travel into a fantasy land and foil encroaching German troops. So grab your broomstick and grab your bed knob as we get ready to venture deep in the plus. So this week, you chose the movie, and you chose Bedknobs and Broomsticks. So
I did.
Why?
I remember this movie as a kid, and I just remember it so fondly. It was so fun to me. At a time when there were a lot of other Disney animated films coming out, this came out not too long after Mary Poppins, which was this huge hit, and it had the same blend of animation and live action. But to me, it was just, there was something special about it that I didn't feel about Mary Poppins, but this movie just really triggers something nostalgic for me, and I think it's so fun and whimsical and imaginative and completely underrated in the Disney film library. And so I wanted to feature it on Deep in the Plus because I think it's such a great film and I want everybody to know about it and go check it out.
So you mentioned Mary Poppins, and you said you like this one more than Mary Poppins?
Personally, I do. I know that is probably not the norm. However, I think if you're a fan of Mary Poppins, you will also love this movie. And it's because there's so much in common. Like if you dig into the backstory of this movie, there's a ridiculous amount of overlap with Mary Poppins. And so if you're a Mary Poppins fan, you should definitely check this out. And I'm not saying Mary Poppins isn't great. I love Mary Poppins. There's something about this movie that is just, it has that joy factor for me that I don't get as much of in Mary Poppins. I think probably Mary Poppins is on paper, better film, to be honest. And I think a lot of critics thought the same thing. It's a shame because this movie actually went into production before Mary Poppins, and then was put on hold several times over the course of Mary Poppins being negotiated with P.L. Travers. If you've seen Saving Mr. Banks, which tells the story of Walt Disney and P.L. Travers, who is the author of the Mary Poppins, the book, you know that there was a lot of back and forth negotiation. She didn't want to sell the book to Walt. She was afraid of what would happen to it when it was made into a film. And so over the course of all those negotiations stalling out, this movie was on again, off again, on again, off again. A lot of the same people worked on both films. The director is the same. Robert Stevenson directed Mary Poppins and then directed this. David Tomlinson, who starred as Mr. Banks in Mary Poppins, stars as Professor Brown in Bedknobs and Broomsticks. Of course, you've got the Sherman Brothers music, and interestingly, one of the more popular songs from this movie, The Beautiful Briny, were there. One of the animation and live action blends of the movie was actually originally written by the Sherman Brothers for Mary Poppins, and it never made it into Mary Poppins, and so they put it into this film. Bill Walsh wrote the screenplay. Well, he co-wrote the screenplay for Mary Poppins, and then he wrote the screenplay for this, so there's quite a bit of overlap. And I think in some ways it's a shame that this movie, even though it was started before Mary Poppins came out, it wasn't finished and released until much later. And I think it lives in the shadow of Mary Poppins. I think when critics saw it, when audiences saw it, they saw it as a kind of not as good Mary Poppins. And so it didn't do as well critically because of that. But I think standing on its own, it's hard not to compare it to Mary Poppins, but standing on its own, it's a really good film.
So you were talking about the music. One of the things that I saw that I thought was interesting was there's a song called A Step in the Right Direction, which apparently was cut from the original movie, yet it was on the soundtrack. So that must have confused a lot of people in 1971 when they saw this on the soundtrack. Changing gears a little bit just to the overall scope of this movie. One of the things that I found interesting was sitting there watching it, I thought, I don't know how they sold this movie to the public, because it was probably the works that it came from, the three books that it came from, are probably not as well known as Mary Poppins. Mm-hmm. And so, since it was probably not material people knew very well, when you look at the movie, it is very confusing. What is this going to be? It's war. It's, mm-hmm. It's Nazis. It's very dark in a lot of ways, but I don't know if I was just sitting at home watching the trailer, if I'd say, hey, there's a movie we need to go see, because I don't know that I know what I'd be expecting when I went in the theater. And I think that it's the same problem when you're flipping through Disney Plus. If you don't know this, you may not stop on this because it may be too hard to grasp. And I think that as a huge Disney fan, and I'm sure you're the same way, I feel like it's sort of an important Disney movie. But at the same time, if I was a casual fan, I probably would just skip right by this.
I can understand that, but I totally agree. I think it is a very important Disney movie. I mean, this movie was started in production before Walt died. Walt 100% had involvement. He's the one who initiated the purchase of the stories from Mary Norton was the author's name, who wrote the original books. And again, yes, I think you're totally right. No one has ever heard of these. I certainly hadn't. She wrote two books called The Magic Bedknob and Bonfires and Broomsticks. And Walt originally purchased the movie rights to the first book, The Magic Bedknob, in 1945. So this goes way back. I mean, this movie came out in 1971, but Walt originally purchased the rights in 1945. He listened to a lot of the Sherman Brothers music that they wrote for this. In that Sherman Brothers little, it's about a 20-minute piece that's in the extras for this film. The Sherman Brothers tell this awesome story that they were singing one of the songs from the film that they thought was great and peppy and a lot of fun, and they turn around and Walt's like falling asleep in his chair. So there's that great connection. The other really important connection, if you are a Disney animation sort of historian or fan of the history and the old original animators who worked with Walt, the 9 old men.
So you're talking about animation. When I'm looking at the animation, I'm clearly seeing Jungle Book and I'm clearly seeing Robin Hood, and it actually lands right in between those two movies. But quality of animation, I feel like, did not live up to traditional Disney standards. Would you agree to that? The animation part with the soccer feels a little bit like it wasn't detailed enough to me, as detailed as Jungle Book, as detailed as Robin Hood.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know that I noticed that, but I guess I feel like it's more sort of the context of the time period, but I didn't directly compare it to those films that it kind of sat in between to notice that strong of a difference.
Well, and the bear on the shore definitely looks like a cross between Little John and Baloo.
Speaking of the animation, there's for Mickey fans out there, there's a kind of hidden Mickey in this, that in the soccer scene, that animated scene with all the animals, one of the animals in the stands is wearing a Mickey Mouse t-shirt.
All right, so let me throw lightning round facts. So this was one of the last films produced by Roy O. Disney, Walt's brother, before he passed away.
Roy died a week after this movie was released.
Disney royalty, a lot of big Disney, you mentioned David Tomlinson, Disney actors. So Roddy McDowall, who was also in The Black Hole, which he played Vincent, which I think is very cool. He was also Mr. Soil in A Bug's Life, which I didn't even know that character had a name. And then Angela Lansbury, obviously Mrs. Potts, David Tomlinson, obviously from Mary Poppins, and then the music from the Sherman Brothers. But Jimmy McDonald, the voice of Mickey Mouse after Walt, played animal voices in this. And I was looking down his bio and saw a lot of movies that he was in, including this one, where he was uncredited, which I think is so funny that like it just wasn't a big deal to him. Maybe, I don't know, but it was like 20 Disney movies that he was doing some sort of sound effects, or he was doing background voices or whatever. And this is a guy who is a Disney, I mean, I assume he's officially a Disney legend, but he's a Disney legend that he was the voice of Mickey Mouse from basically the time that Walt stopped till basically the time that Wayne Allwine started. Thurl Ravenscroft was also a singing voice in this one, who is Tony the Tiger, You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch. Received 5 Academy Awards and won one of them, and the award that it won was Best Visual Effects, which, like, let's talk about that for a second. It was 1971, and the effects of the marching, like, suits of armor or the flying bed, these were pretty cool effects for, I think, 1971. And I go back and I feel like they kind of stand the test of time. This doesn't look like Plan 9 from Outer Space with a lot of, like, wires hanging around everywhere. It looks like a legit production for, again, 1971.
I really felt like this movie held up well. There are some really interesting effects, and apparently the effects portion of the movie took longer than the actual live action filming. I think the live action filming took about 2 months, and the effects took like 3. And I think they all hold up well. Like, even they get on the bed, they turn the bed knob, and it takes off, and there's this weird, like, 70s psychedelic sort of painted, colored thing going on, all kinds of weird effects, like you're on some sort of acid trip. But it's still, like, it doesn't look, it's a little bit childish because this movie is a kid's movie, but it doesn't feel super dated. Like, I think it doesn't throw you out of the movie at any point to think, oh, this seems so old. You just feel like you're watching a movie set in the 40s.
I agree. So here's another thing that I was thinking about while I was watching this movie. I got a lot of Harry Potter vibes off this movie.
Totally.
I mean, here's a woman who is taking a correspondence class to be a witch. She's riding the broom for the first time, the same way that Harry has the problem when he rides the broom for the first time. The cat that reminds me of like a Crookshanks cat.
The mangiest cat I have ever seen.
Right. I mean,
seriously, I feel like they must have styled that cat's hair to look that mangy, because I've never seen a cat in real life that looks as mangy as Cosmic Creepers. There were some other things I saw too that reminded me of Harry Potter. One was the motorcycle with the sidecar was totally like, I was like, oh, I bet J.K. Rowling saw this and that's where she modeled Hagrid's motorbike. And Portobello Road, the entire Portobello Road scene just feels very Diagon Alley to me, in an old, charming sort of sense. That was definitely a vibe I got when I watched that scene in the movie.
All right, so let's talk about Portobello Road. One of the things that I got a vibe on from that was the old, like, If You Had Wings, or the old River of Time, Rio del Tiempo at Epcot.
Well, I think part of it was what they were trying to show was the cultural diversity of London at the time, and demonstrate how many different cultural and ethnic groups all kind of came together in London. But at the same time, a lot of that footage, there was apparently a much longer scene there, and a lot of that was cut in the 25 minutes or so of footage that was cut for the premiere. I found it weird when they were talking about that. So they have that extra with the Sherman Brothers talking about the deleted scenes and everything, but then the version they have of the movie on Disney Plus is still the edited version. It's not the restored version with that extra footage. They found about, I think, 80% of it, give or take, and were able to put some of it back in, and that's not the version that's on Disney Plus.
Yeah, so the running time of the original theatrical cut, which is the same as the one from Disney Plus, is 117 minutes, and the runtime of that director's cut that we're talking about is 139 minutes. So that's basically 2 hours and 20 minutes, which is what we were talking about earlier. I was surprised as well. I mean, I actually watched the bonus footage first, and that Sherman Brothers, if you get a chance to watch it, you really should. It's only 20 minutes long, and it's very cool. But I watched it first, and then went and watched the movie and thought, wait a minute, where's all this stuff that they were literally just talking about? So you're right. It is interesting that they chose to do the original version, and yet they chose the content as extra content that was obviously meant for the director's cut. So
Right, and so much of that extra content focuses on the deleted scenes.
right, and they're like, this movie was trash when they deleted all those scenes out. I'm glad that all the scenes are back, and then they show you the trash version, not the trash version, but just the version that we know. And so it would be cool to get your hands on the original one. I don't know if Disney Plus plans on doing this down the road, but there are probably a lot of movies that they have multiple versions of that it would be neat to see both versions available. I can't imagine how difficult it would really be for them to offer that. One other thing that I thought was very interesting is I appreciated the fact that the Germans spoke German, like not a Kevin Costner, Robin Hood, I don't have an accent kind of a thing, but legit, like they're speaking German. And there was like a time or two where they used subtitles, but for the most part they didn't, which I thought was kind of cool, just to say, I mean, you kind of get what they're saying, and the fact that like they look angry and they're pointing, and you know, you don't really need to know exactly what they're saying. But again, I really appreciate the fact that they did use they did speak German and didn't just do some weird offensive German accent. So one other thing that I felt like I needed to talk about is this is a very strong female character. Which seems maybe like the time, the early 70s may have been the time when maybe they were trying to say something about a strong female character, but I appreciate that this is a strong female character. I mean, she basically takes on the responsibility of fighting a war for this town, leading them into battle. And yet at the same time, we hear these offhanded comments from David Tomlinson about, well, I better keep this because, women lose things. And
then God, that's exactly, I literally wrote that quote down because it made me insane.
And the other one was when he was trying to find her spell, and he said something about, when will women ever learn to organize things, or something along those lines. And I just was like, okay, wait a minute, I'm getting mixed messages here. I mean, she literally saves the day, and she's blown up, and she's keeping them together, and she's had these kids dropped on her, and she's still like fighting the good fight. And she is the lead strong character from this whole thing. And yet they take these jabs at her. I'm not sure. It's like a mixed message, right?
The other thing that I kind of find this mixed message is she's this strong, independent woman who's, trying to follow her passion, and despite getting and part of her passion is to try to, do something positive with her abilities and use her apparent talent as a witch to try to change the tide of the war. But at the same time, at the end, she kind of basically says, I'm good at being a witch, but it's not really what I want. I just want like a family and to have someone to take care of me. And it's, that's actually one of the songs that was cut, was her kind of lamenting David Tomlinson's departure, and kind of seeming like, oh, well, all I really wanted was love. And that frustrated me that they had to kind of water down the character that way. But again, I mean, this book was written in the 40s and it was made into a movie in the late 60s, early 70s. So, you can only fight society so much, I guess.
Okay, so after all this talk of war and anti-feminists and Nazis, would you recommend this movie?
100%. I love this movie. This is classic Disney to me, and I think if you've never seen it and you're a fan of Disney movies, you're missing out by not having seen this movie. It's got so many classic elements of what makes a Disney movie great. It's got great people behind it. It's got great talent in it. It's got Sherman Brothers music, which I'm sorry, the Sherman Brothers never did anything that wasn't great. Just Walt had a hand in it. Roy had a hand in it. I think if you love Disney movies and you haven't seen this, you absolutely need to.
So I agree that if you're a Disney fan, you are missing out if you haven't seen this movie. But if you're not, I don't know. Like, I feel like it's going to be a little bit of a tough movie for young kids to watch. I don't know if it's the pacing or the songs or the dark overtones of it. It is rated G, but and even though, again, Disney Plus has said, oh, it's got some tobacco use, you better watch out, and yet
There are also Nazis.
There are Nazis. Literally, like the swastika shows up in the opening credits to let you know what's happening. I'm not sure that I would go out and recommend this one unless you're a Disney fan. And if you're a Disney fan, like straight up Disney fan, you have to see this movie, and no doubt. But if you're not, especially not for little kids, I would not recommend it there.
No, I think that's fair for little kids. But I also think, for older kids and adults, there's also some interesting war history in this movie. I mean, granted, it takes place in 1940, and World War II didn't end until 1945. So it's kind of got this interesting positioning in the historical context of World War II. But there are lots of elements. It was happening during the London Blitz, where they were bombing London. People did have to evacuate. Interestingly, Angela Lansbury, that happened to her. She had to evacuate London during the bombings when she was a child. So this movie really resonated with her too. But I think, for older kids, there's some historical learning opportunities in this. There's also some interesting, Disney history learning opportunities. So I get, if it's, an 8-year-old, this might not be the right movie for them. But for older kids, I think it would be, it actually has some opportunity in it.
All right, Jill. So what is your deep pick of the week?
So my deep pick of the week this week is an episode of the old Disneyland show. The episode is called The Plausible Impossible. So Disneyland was I think, initial incarnation of what later became Walt Disney Presents and Wonderful World of Color. But originally in the late 1950s, it was called Disneyland. And a lot of it was Walt talking about, the building of Disneyland, but also a lot of the animated pictures that the Disney studios were creating. So in this episode, again, called The Plausible Impossible, Walt is quoting from the old sort of tome of Disney animation, The Art of Animation. It's a specific principle of animation where you are taking something impossible and making it appear as though it's natural or possible to happen in reality. And this really caught my attention because way back when I was in college, I took a philosophy class and we studied Aristotle. And so this was actually initially an Aristotelian principle of drama, that it is far better to take something impossible and try to make it seem plausible than to find something that is actually probable yet highly unlikely. People are more willing to believe the impossible as long as you can make it seem possible. And so I think that's a lot of what animation is. And Walt kind of explains this in detail in this episode by showing us clips of different old Disney shorts. So he shows a scene from Mickey Through the Looking Glass, where all of the different pieces of furniture and household implements like the Nutcracker and the telephone are all anthropomorphic. They all come to life. And it's it's him demonstrating what makes Disney animation classic. I think it's fascinating. The other thing that I loved about this episode is that they showed an old cut scene from Snow White. So if you're a Snow White fan, you should absolutely go back and watch this episode because it contains this entire scene that was sketched out for the movie, but it was never fully animated. But they show the sketch drawing animated with the voice and music that went along with it. And interestingly, Ward Kimball, who directed the animation in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, had a very big hand in that cutscene from Snow White. It was one of the full-length animation projects that he worked on. So if you are a fan of Disney animation, I strongly recommend checking out this episode because it really gives you a cool look at how Walt looked at animation, what he looked for in creating his animated stories. And then it gives you a look back at some old Disney shorts that you may have never seen. And it also makes me hopeful that Disney Plus is going to get more episodes of the old Disneyland and those shows, because I think there's so much cool history in all of those that most of us haven't seen in a really long time.
Very cool. So now I feel a little stupid about mine because you used a lot of big words and you quoted Aristotle. And mine is a little bit more pedestrian, let's say.
Oh, that was a
So
big word, though.
it was a big word. Thank you. I appreciate the pandering. So I just got back from Walt Disney World, and one of the things I love is the decorations there. So before I went, I watched a special on Disney Plus called Decorating Disney Holiday Magic. Despite the fact that it's hosted by Whoopi Goldberg, it's a really good look at what it takes to decorate the Disney parks. So it's really cool that they show what it takes to put the caps on Sleeping Beauty Castle. They show all the different trees that they do and how they get them into the parks and putting the poinsettias in at night. And it's just really cool to see how they transform everything. And I don't think they do it quite the same anymore. This was a couple years old, this special, but I don't think they do everything in one night anymore. And I think part of it is there's just so much to do between decorating the resorts and each of the individual parks. And now that Animal Kingdom's getting its own Christmas decorations that are specific to Pandora, specific to Discovery Island, it's really kind of, I can't imagine it's possible to put it all in one night, but it's really cool to look at. Every resort has different garland. Every resort has a different tree. There's all the gingerbread structures that they have. They talk about building the gingerbread house at the Grand Floridian. I love this. Like, I love Christmas and I love Disney. So this to me is like the perfect combination. And it's really cool for me to see behind the scenes on something that has to do with Disney parks and also is something that I know that I can watch it and then I can go kind of still experience it when I go there because the things that they're talking about are still there. So I would definitely recommend this if you are looking for something a little bit different to watch for Christmas, or if you're getting ready to go to the parks, or if you just got back from the parks. Again, it's called Decorating Disney Holiday Magic, and you should check it out.
If you like what you're watching, make sure you like and subscribe. You can also find us on social at Deep in the Plus on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And if you're a Disney Parks fan, don't forget to catch me and Rob on Park Center Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. on WDWNT.com.